The coronavirus changed something significant in America. It changed the way we work. The truth is, thousands of employees were sent home because they didn't want people gathering together in large groups and businesses and organizations across the country. And that surge in remote employees threw people into chaos because most leaders aren't used to dealing with employees who are working remote. Today, I want to give you the secrets of how to lead your team when you're working remotely that'll take your company, your organization, your church, your ministry to an entirely new level. How to lead remote workers. I'll tell you, it's a question that's been asked ever since the coronavirus hit, because so many companies were offloading people, sending them home. They didn't want to put them in the same building together. In fact, it's interesting that open office trend that was so huge in the 80s, now people are looking at that as just a petri dish for viruses. So they started sending people home. And that's the important thing I want you to understand is we're not ever going back. I mean, the truth is a lot of people will go back to work, and because there are a lot of jobs that you just have to do in community with people and together and as a team. However, I just believe that vast numbers of remote employees are going to stay remote after this because we've learned so much about it. And our team at Cooke Media Group has always been remote. At the most, we have probably 3 to 4 employees that work together on a regular basis. But at the same time, every day we're interfacing with team members in Kansas City, Greenville, South Carolina, Tulsa, Oklahoma, sometimes in various places around the world. So the truth is, we've spent our almost 40-year career working with remote people. And so it's very second nature to us. So I thought I'd take this podcast episode and share with you some of the techniques we've learned at Cooke Media Group about how to lead a team effectively that's scattered all over the place. So let me give you 8 or 10, 12 ideas that I think if you're a leader, and if you know a leader who is going to be leading people remotely or has been thrown into that situation, please share this. Share this because it helps more and more people understand how to be effective, particularly an effective leader when it comes to people working in different locations. So share it. Thanks for watching, by the way, and thanks for tuning in. I think it's so helpful and important to us. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. So here's the things I think about, and understand something before I go into the list. A background concept that I really want you to understand is if you're a remote employee, if you're a remote worker, we need to change your attitude from full-time to remote. I've done a podcast on this episode, but I want to bring it back because it's so important. I'll never forget, years ago, I produced a 1-hour documentary on William Wilberforce. It was the anniversary, the 400-year anniversary of him abolishing the slave trade in the British Empire. And PBS, we were going to air it. It aired on nationwide on PBS. It was shown in the White House. It got a lot of press. It won a number of awards. It was called The Better Hour. And it was on William Wilberforce. And when it came to the audio for we'd done the edit, we'd done the rough cut. I wanted to go into the sweetening session for audio. Had some unusual things I wanted to do. So I booked some time at a recording studio. Perfectly normal. Booked some time at a recording studio. Go in, and the engineer that was going to do the project was a full-time employee. He was there all the time. This was, in essence, his room. He had it tweaked the way he wanted it. He had it set up the way he wanted it. He had it the way he liked it. And so I said, look, I want to do some different, unusual things with the soundtrack for this. And I went down the list. And he thought for a minute, and he said, you know what? That's just not the way we do things here. I'm not set up to do that, and it wouldn't be worth my time to switch the room around, and it would be too much trouble. And so I'm sorry, but we just can't do it. So I went down the street to another recording studio, almost identical facility, almost identical equipment. But this time the engineer was a freelancer. And of course, freelancers, they wake up every morning unemployed, and they're constantly having to hustle to bring work in the door. So I talked to him about what I'd need to do and what I wanted to make happen with this particular audio track. And he paused for a minute and said, I'll tell you what, Mr. Cooke, you go down to the kitchen, have a cup of coffee, give me about 20, 25 minutes. I'll rewire the room. We'll have it all set up and be ready to go. And it hit me like a bolt of lightning that this full-time employee at the other studio, he was set in his ways, man. He was in a rut. He was locked in the way he always did things. He always got a salary. He had his benefits. He had his insurance all lined up. He did things the same way every single day. But this freelancer at the other studio, he was probably working between 4, 5, 6 different studios, always with different equipment, different clients, different types of projects. And he'd learned to be flexible. He'd learned to be driven by the project, driven by the client, and was much more open. And I'll tell you, during this time of remote workers exploding across the country, I keep going back to that situation. And I think as a remote worker, number one, we have to be much more flexible about what we're doing. And as a leader of remote people, we have to be much more flexible. So understand, don't get in that rut. Even though you may be a full-time employee, and even though you're working remotely, you may stay a full-time employee, and that's great. Here's the thing. Don't get in the mindset of a full-time employee. Always stay in the mindset of a freelancer. It's project-driven. Your boss is your client. You're trying to make this work and be flexible enough, particularly during this age where you're shifting from an office to a home office or some other remote facility. So that flexibility will make all the difference. So let me give you some things that we've learned. And with that in mind, let me give you some things that we've learned over the years at Cooke Media Group. We've been producing documentaries and productions, television specials, and events all over the world for 40 years now. And the things that we've learned that have helped make us, I'll never go back to a large staff. There was a time when we bought a building in Burbank here in California, We had a big staff. We moved in and we just were kind of miserable. It just didn't work out for us because we're wired to be remote workers, and we're wired to travel, and that sort of mindset is just what we're all about. So let me tell you some of the things we've learned. Number one, if you're a leader of remote workers, get to know your people. And that sounds silly, but you'd be amazed at the number of organizations I see that have maybe 25, 50, 100, 200 or more employees, or the leader, the CEO, the pastor, the ministry leader, the executive director, whoever, doesn't know the employees. Sure, he knows his direct reports. He knows some people, maybe a few levels down from there, but he really doesn't know a lot of the employees. If you're going to lead people remotely, you need to know your employees. You don't have to be their best friend, but you need to know them. John Maxwell, the great leadership expert, told me one time that, a great leader needs to walk through the factory. In other words, he needs to spend time out there on the factory floor, meeting people, the loading dock guys, the people in mailing and shipping, the assistant to the assistant, the interns. Get to know them. And particularly, you'll find when you lead people remotely, getting to know them is going to matter more than ever because you're not interfacing with them regularly. You're not seeing them every day. So knowing how they think, what their strengths are, how they work is going to be critical. And along that line, understand that chemistry matters. Probably more than ever. I trust my team. In fact, that kind of chemistry, knowing your team, is what builds trust. And I have to say that probably the greatest foundation of leading people remotely is trust. Because if you don't trust them to do the work, if they don't trust you to be giving them the right vision and the right strategy and the right leadership, it's going to break down. It's just going to fail. So I think number one, get to know your people. Take that time. Even if you have a big team, every week, pick 5 people. Every day, take one. Take them to lunch. Have coffee with them. Meet them for breakfast. Just go down and sit in their cubicle or sit in their office or go to visit their home, whatever, and just spend 20, 30, 40 minutes. Early on in my 20s, I was a nobody at the organization I worked with. I worked at a big, big media organization. And the boss, the top guy, the CEO, would just walk into my office, plop down on a sofa, and just chat. Every once in a while, he'd just walk in and just chat. And it developed such an incredible, an admiration for that guy. I had such an admiration for that guy because I looked up to him. And it built this incredible sense of trust. I would walk into a fire for that guy because he took the time to get to know me. So number one, get to know your people. Number two, know the difference between organizational structure and communication structure. Now, this is really important, and people don't really understand this, but this is incredibly important, particularly when it comes to remote workers. Organizational structure matters, and I get it. You need to have the president, and the vice president, and the managers, and the directors, and direct reports, and you need to have an organizational structure because that's what makes the world tick. I get that. But when it comes to communication, it needs to be much more fluid, much more free-flowing. I talked to a graphic designer the other day. I said, "What are you working on?" He said, "Well, we're doing a major rebrand at our organization. It's a big nonprofit. So we're doing a major rebrand." I said, "What are you working on right now?" And he said, "Well, I'm redesigning the logo. We've gone through the whole brand strategy. We've got all the terms that we need, and now I'm coming up with a new logo." And I said, "Well, how long does it take to do that for you?" And he said, "Well, honestly, it's only taken me a couple weeks." He said, "I've got a number of alternatives. I've come up with some what I think are great ideas." And I said, well, has it been decided? He said, oh, no. They've drug it out for like 6-8 months. And I said, why? He said, because I've got to get the guy above me's approval. Then he's got to go get the guy above his approval. Then he's got to go get the approval of the guy above him. And then he's going to get the approval of the guy above him. So by the time it actually gets to the CEO, it's probably not even remotely the logo this designer came up with. Let me tell you something. If you want to function in a creative organization, in an effective, intentional organization, communication needs to be fluid. That designer, that logo designer, needs to be able to get to the president or the CEO if that's what it takes. You need to be much more fluid, cross boundaries, cross lines. When it comes to a budget approval, when it comes to schedules, when it comes to strategy, all those things, great. Keep with your organizational structure, I get it. But when it comes to communication, it needs to be more free-flowing, more fluid. Otherwise, things that should just take a super short amount of time are going to get bogged down and hold you back. Number 3, when you're leading people remotely, be accurate when it comes to your expectations. Remember, they're not bringing work in for you to see every day. You're not interfacing with them face-to-face every day. You're not seeing results quite as often. So things can get off track pretty quick and far easier. So your expectations need to be really clear. At Cooke Media Group with our team, since we've worked remotely forever, I don't really care when people do the work. I don't really care when people do the work. I don't care if they work in the middle of the night. I don't care if they get up early. I don't care if they work in the afternoon. It doesn't matter to me, but we're very clear about expectations. This is what we need that website to look like. This is what we need it to do. This is what we want this video to accomplish. And here's the deadline. And we have a whole, our production team will back time and come up with different phases in a schedule when the client should see the rough cut, when the rough cut needs to be go to the audio studio for the final sweetening, all these different phases of the project. We're very clear about those things. And it's because when you're working remotely and you've got different people doing different things in different places, if your expectations aren't clear, you will get messed up pretty quickly and get off track. So just remember, make sure your expectations are clear. Don't assume anything. Make sure your expectations are clear. Number 4, when you're leading people remotely, workers remotely, get them the right tools. There's some great software out there, for instance, Slack for communication, Asana for team management, project management. There's so many other things like Trello, Skype for making calls. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Just Google production, project management software for teams. It's easy to come up with stuff. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're free, but the truth is you can find something that allows everybody to stay on the same page the way they are. Now, I have mixed feelings about everything. I'm one of these guys that I see something glitter, I go off to it. So the frustration you get working with me is that I'm always sitting, hey, what about this app? What about this software? What do you think about this? And it doesn't take long before somebody blows it up and says, no, it doesn't work for this reason or it doesn't work for that reason. But I'm always looking for new stuff. Always. Partly because I get bored easy. But the truth is, we all know that we can be on the same page by looking at the same project management software or be on Slack and all be talking together. You can even come up with free, simple things, iMessages, things like that. If you use them effectively and are very clear about it, it really helps. But the bottom line is, remote workers, if everybody's doing their own thing and tracking their own way and scheduling it their own way, it's going to get chaotic pretty quick. So immediately find some software applications that will help you manage the project, manage the schedule, manage your to-do list corporately so you're all on the same page. Get team accounts so you can all sign in together and you're on the same page. Number 5, make everyone feel welcome. Now, here's the thing. In many organizations, a lot of churches, ministries, some people even, we noticed this during coronavirus. Some people are going to continue to come in, a small group, and others are going to work from home. We'll get a mixture. Now, it's important that you make sure everybody feels welcome and everybody feels equal and kind of in the same, community. And there's some interesting ways to do it. Trello, which I mentioned Trello before as a project management tool, it's a great piece of software. Their team is gotten famous here lately. During the coronavirus, they became famous for doing something interesting. So they have remote workers, and they also have a number of workers that still come into the office. So if they have a meeting that mixes both groups, They do something interesting. The people that are in the office will still go to the conference room, but they'll all individually open their computers up. They'll open their laptops up, and they'll get on Google Hangouts or Skype or whatever tool they're using, Zoom, whatever tool they're using. They'll all individually get on. So everybody in the meeting is in a separate box. So you don't get 5 separate boxes from the remote folks and then one box with 5 people in it. And that's a really cool thing because it equalizes everybody. Even if those 5 people at the company are in the same room, it's just a really cool idea for equalizing everybody and putting people on the same playing field. So just think that when you're working with your team, make everybody feel equal, welcome, and a part of the same community. You don't want to create divisions because some people are at the office and some people are remote. Number 6, when you're leading remote workers, remember, it's not all about the job. It's not all about work. Even when people are remote, celebrate their birthdays. Come up with a way to communicate that to people. If it's appropriate to get together for certain events, meet after work for dinner, celebrate birthdays, have a nice lunch for people, meet at a restaurant somewhere. Depending on the circumstance, always think that, keep in mind, it's not just about work. You need to create that sense of community because remember, when everybody was in the office, they could celebrate birthdays. They could bring in cookies. People could bring in, special event things, have Taco Tuesdays or something. We need to think about how to continue that when people are working remotely. Sometimes you can send people a gift. Sometimes you can meet somewhere on location. Just think about how you can look beyond the job and create that sense of community, even with remote workers. Number 7, try your best. This is a little more difficult, but try your best to create an overarching schedule and strategy for what you're doing. Now, this involves a number of things. Number 1, it involves regularly communicating with people. So, I'm not a big fan of meetings, but as a leader, I know meetings are necessary. You have to have certain meetings. It's just a matter of how to run them well. And that's a big part of this. And so it's good to kind of establish some schedules if you can. As I said, I don't really care when people work so much. However, there are times we need to meet about a project. If we're getting ready to meet to go film, and a matter of months ago, we were filming in China and Mongolia, and we had to get together to pre-plan that trip. And so we get online at certain times because we know we have a sense of when everybody's working, everybody's focused, when everybody's available. So think in terms of coming up with some kind of a overarching, it can be fluid to a great degree, but some kind of a strategy, schedule, idea when you know people are available to communicate, when they're available to talk, when they're actually focused, when they need private time to write or whatever it is they do privately. That's important. So just coming up with that schedule, I think, is really, really critical. Number 8, encourage your employees. When you're working remotely, this is particularly with companies that are just shifting to remote workers, encourage your employees to create a workspace in their home. You know what? When I started, I was at a desk in our bedroom. When Kathleen and I started Cooke Pictures, and it was Cooke Pictures at the time that became Cooke Media Group, I literally started in a little room next to the bed. And a little bitty desk. And I learned pretty quick with 2 young daughters in the house with a dog, that's just not going to work. You can't have a business call and our daughters come in and need something and the dog comes in and jumps on my lap. You just got to be careful about those things. So as much as possible, and you want to integrate your family into this, but as much as possible, it helps to be professional if you have a space dedicated to work. And I say this particularly to writers. There's a lot of advice for writers out there like get up, get dressed. Don't sit there in your pajamas all day and write. Get dressed because it shifts your mindset. It shifts your mindset. Get dressed, go sit at a desk that's designed for work, close the door, and focus. And, I sat down with my kids, my wife Kathleen, my kids. I sat down with them and said, girls, when I'm in here, Daddy has to do work. And they got it. They were cool with that. Every once in a while they need something. I'm fine with that. But it worked out really well. So encourage your team, your employees that are working remotely from home to create that professional space. It's so important. Last couple things. Number 9, in spite of what I just said, do give your employees working remotely some space. Be more flexible with them. They are going to have crisis. They are going to have family emergencies, issues that come up when you work from home. You just can't help it. I mean, everybody's been in that conference call where we suddenly heard the dog barking in the background or suddenly heard the 3-year-old come running in screaming because he or she had fallen down. We've been in those situations, and you know what? It happens. It just happens. So as a leader of remote workers, learn to give and take, give them a little space. And I'll tell you, if you do, it's another thing that builds trust. And they will work so hard for you knowing that you've given them that kind of space and you've allowed them to be flexible. And then finally, number 10, I would say, think of this shift. The shift that started with the coronavirus is a major shift that is going to change the future of work. I just am a big fan of remote working. I always have been. I think freelancing is fantastic. I totally get the fact that sometimes you need a team of employees that are working in a company, in an office all the time. I get that. But think of the number of your team, the number of your employees or your team that could work from home and be very effective at it. Think about it. Maybe if you shifted the way you think about work, so many leaders are stuck on this idea that everybody has to show up. I want to see everybody. That's the old days. In the old days, there was no sense of trust. In the old days, I had to make sure I saw you doing the work. I had to get that report from you. I had to, there was no trust. Today, if you have a real environment of trust with your team, then there's no reason in the world they can't work remotely. I think you should consider that this is not going back to the way it used to be. It's going to change the face of work. And what might help them to stay on track is my unique planner. I don't want to do a little shameless self-promotion here, but I created my unique planner for people that are working as freelancers, creative people, full-time employees, people that this helps you track what you're doing, and it allows you to list your priorities, which is so incredibly important. Put your priorities down there, has your schedule, what you need to do. And I've said before, research time and time again indicates that when you write it down, you remember so much more. So think about one of the great gifts. If you're starting to have employees working from home and you're sending them home to work remotely, one of the greatest gifts you can give them is one of my unique creative planners. I'll tell you what, it could change the way they organize themselves at home, and that's the tool they all need to have. So thanks for tuning into this. I think this is important right now. Share it with leaders that you know who may be struggling. I'm amazed. I'm reading in the newspaper and magazines, on television, that the coronavirus started this thing where leaders were just in chaos because they'd never had employees work from home, work remotely before. Never done it. And I was baffled by it, but the truth is, a lot of people don't know these simple rules about how to lead people effectively when they're working remotely. So just remember, there's a way to do it that can inspire your team, give them amazing amounts of freedom, and that will allow them in so many ways to work better, work smarter, work more efficiently, and do a greater job. Thanks for tuning in again. Check me out at philcooke.com, my blog, philcooke.com. Please recommend these podcasts. Share them with your friends. Send them to people that you know that could use these leadership skills and techniques, because it could really transform the way they lead their organization. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in next time.